in terms of thinking about like sort of the artists negotiating how their identity was kind of presented, and really thinking about sort of album covers as bits of kind of visual communication that when you look historically become representative of certain narratives around, in this case, representations of gender and blackness. And I think one of the things I was really interested in was the idea of how can you better understand an image? So for me, that driver of kind of reenacting or parodying or copying is a way of understanding the image through an experiential, physical, embodied sort of method. So that was the kind of starting point. I mean, this is probably a good segue. There is like a bit of video of me hula hooping, which apart from just being a bit random, is actually, well, again, lots of people know that I'm slightly obsessed with Grace Jones, but so a few years ago, I did a show in Syracuse, which is in upstate New York, which is actually where Grace Jones went to high school, sort of basically her hometown. And so this is me hula hooping outside of Grace Jones's family church. So I think still one of her brothers still preaches there. But and yeah, one of the things I'm interested in with Grace is her like durational performance practice. So like on stage, she sings "Slave to the Rhythm" while hula hooping, and it's like the, you know, the like 8-10 minute version, and I think she hula hoops quite regularly as part of her like regime. So again, I was just really interested in sort of like that situational act of, I mean, I can't hula hoop for that long, obviously, but yeah. Yeah, and so the series covers has just sort of gone through these various iterations where it's often responding to, I think, these images that I'm coming across of, initially it was very much focused around representations of Black women, solo singers, solo performers, and really thinking about how they were kind of negotiating or presenting or mediating their identities through the images of these album covers. Obviously, there's a relationship to the kind of music as well. I mean, there aren't always performers. So for this one, you know, Funkadelic is, you know, George Clinton's band, but the model here is Barbara Cheeseborough, who was, you know, really significant Black model in the 60s and 70s. She was the first model on the cover of Essence magazine, which is important African American women's magazine. So yeah, I mean, what it's led me through is to kind of explore some of the histories and dynamics of these figures. And the work has kind of evolved from a photographic series into these live performances, where I'd try and hold the poses for the duration of a track from the album. So the audience is invited to listen to the music while I sort of hold this pose. It's me doing Grace. So there's a kind of different relationship in these kind of live contexts. And yeah, most recently, I sort of did this video series, which is going to be shown again actually at Cattle's Yard as part of the Untitled group exhibition at Cattle's Yard, which is happening in January, February? I should know, apologies. But next year, hopefully. Yeah, and that's a series that's me performing these 8 album covers in different rooms in the kind of domestic space. So it's kind of an extension of that work. Again, always for the length of an album track. Yeah. Oh, we're on to Teddy.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that with us. What I'm interested in, like the thoughts about your own thoughts about your own body, actually, in trying to recreate, re-represent these album covers, and especially I'm thinking of a performance context. You saying that you're having to hold these poses and these moments for the duration of a track. Did that change your relationship or augment how you think about your relationship of representing these images?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think I mean, for me, there's something really important about just the physicality, like, of the image. Like, often just really thinking through the pose, and essentially what's the dynamic of the pose. Often it's thinking about through, you know, almost like decoding the image and really thinking about the kind of gaze and gestures. And certainly when it's done durationally, I think for me there's a sense of like trying to maintain this image, because often, you know, the album cover is about an idealization of this artist. I mean, that's often what they're sort of trying to kind of project, is you know, an idealized sense of their identity. But with me trying to do it, what often happens is obviously I can't, I mean, I hardly even get very close to the original poses. But for me, there's something about that failure and the disjuncture between the original and my attempts. And obviously with that series where I was looking at these female singers, there's, you know, a sort of gender difference, my male body and a sort of like light drag, as I call it. So again, and I think for me, it's about the performance in a way becomes a way of sort of like annotating the original image. I often think about it as a kind of relationship where I'm inviting the audience, particularly in the durational works, to spend time with these original images and really think about the construction of these images and the transmission of these images, particularly over time and historically.
I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but there is a show on Grace Jones at the moment, for those of you who are watching as well, at Nottingham Contemporary. And some of the things that you've just touched upon there, some of the questions and thoughts and ideas that came to mind, I went to see it not too long ago, about in terms of how Black women specifically are represented and what kind of images are applied to them and what kind of images they actually are. I will use the word authentic in quotes, but what images actually come quite naturally from this person and what kind of ideals are put upon these people to present. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting to think about your own relationship to these images and what you're asking people to come to see you, to think about these images and how they're prepared and how they're presented. Oh, sorry, and how they digest them as well. But yeah, this is cool. And I think this particular image actually extends into the lounging series, which is arguably an extension from the cover series. And can you talk a little bit about that as well, from moving from these durational performative works into something that's quite situational, and yeah, again, looking at imagery or imagery-based works?
My hips are hurting, so I'm going to sit down. Performance in your 40s. Yeah, the kind of lounging series really comes out of, I think, you know, as I was developing the original series, really thinking about, I guess, sort of typologies, really thinking about commonalities, particularly in pose and gesture that were coming through. And I just sort of noticed that there were often these images of performers from the mid 80s, early 80s, in this kind of reclining pose. And the currency of that pose became quite interesting, I think, for me, in terms of really thinking about, you know, what did it mean? And not exclusively, but predominantly Black male singers. So yeah, I always kind of thought about the kind of, I guess, you know, what was at stake in these artists' kind of sort of, sorry, am I still sharing? Can you still see? I'm just, okay. Yeah, adopting these posts, so people like Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, you know, there's, and for me, it became an interesting about kind of masculinity, really, to think about, again, how these forms, the album cover was, in a way, could provide a kind of lens to look at, within popular culture, how Black masculinity was obviously being framed, and thinking about what was at stake really for these performers in adopting this pose. And this pose has a long history, particularly within art, you know, as a kind of classical Renaissance pose. So what did it mean for these individuals to kind of adopt it? And also the idea that it was a kind of collective thing. So, and I'm just sort of really fascinated by the dynamic of it, because I think there's a sense of kind of like sort of like being relaxed and in some ways quite non-threatening, when it speaks to kind of sexuality. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking there must have been so many different shots to choose from, and for them to have the, you know, someone made that decision of, yes, that's the one we're going to choose, whether it's because it's on a vinyl and the body is stretched out and so it actually does take up the space that needs to be taken up, or, you know, all of these artistic decisions. But I think some of the things that you said about it being non-threatening and things like that, and almost the smoothness of the music, it kind of plays into that as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And these photos are great.
Yeah, I did a residency at Wising in 2017, so it was me lounging around Wising.
So we had a thing where we sent you some album covers, and we said, would you be interested to recreate some of these album covers? Do you have a chance to look at those? Do you want to comment on that, or do you want to just jump into it?
I don't know if I need to pull them up, because I realised that I didn't put them in.
I have them as a PowerPoint if you'd like me to share my screen.
Yeah, that would be good, actually.
Okay.
I did have a look at them, but I've not rehearsed, which is my methodology. Okay. Probably I won't do all of them, but I might try a few.
Yeah, go for the ones that you feel. Can everyone see that? Okay. So which one should we go for? The first one is Slick Rick.
Oh yeah, okay. Now it's a thing about angles, isn't it? It's kind of I hope you can see me, because I can't see myself. So no, I cannot. Oh no, I need to take the background off. Sorry. This is.
We have to get a city background in.
Got that far. I just have to do. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely angles. The feet position, I think, is important there.
I don't know if you're going to be able to see me on the floor. So.
Yeah, I think, that's pretty good.
Come back a bit.
Love it. I think that's great.
Hold on. I mean, in some ways, this is a good representation of what I'm just like messing around in the studio.
He's almost balancing. He's like, looks like he's just about to fall over.
Yeah, he's like, this knee isn't on the ground. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. I think maybe we should choose 2 more. We have quite a long selection, but maybe just 2 more, then we can move on to some other things.
Heads low up. I love that James Brown one.
Yeah, this one's great. We were wondering how you might go about recreating this.
I don't know whether to stand up or whether to lie down. This one. It's like, just looking at the expression. Doesn't actually look like James Brown anyway. What's that? Nice. The expression is always something that's kind of.
Yeah, I'm sorry that the quality is bad. I thought the quality would be better. But I don't know. It's sort of. Is it like a half smile?
I'm not sure. I can't tell if it's like a little mustache action going on atop a half smile. Maybe, who knows?
And I like that he's like holding these flames in his hands.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of the location in the kind of desert and stuff, and the sort of lightning, yeah. Sort of transmission of like sort of just, again, super hyper masculine. I mean,
yeah. And then last one, which one should we go for? Candice, you got preference?
what have we got?
I like either the Anita Baker or the Janicean one.
Whichever one comes first. Ah, Anita Baker.
God, Rapture brings back memories. I don't know if you've got to see me. Hold on. Maybe I'll put this on the floor. Okay. This leg is behind. This is actually quite complex. Hold on.
Yeah, she's like holding her leg up and hugging it close.
That arm. Something like that. I think she might be sitting on her leg.
Nice. Yeah.
Something like that. Arm like that.
We're not going to make you sit for the whole duration of thank you, Harold. That was great.
Anita Baker. Caught Up in the Rapture of Love. That's one of my mum's favourite albums. That just brings back a lot of memories.
Well, yeah, we thank you for opting to do that. That was brilliant. Okay, so just to kind of bring it to a little bit more present day with what you're up to now, it would be really great to talk a little bit about your teaching experience and how that's influenced your practice. So for many, I think many people who have joined this conversation are also practicing artists, but they also teach or facilitate workshops. And I think it'd be really interesting to talk about in terms of thinking of performance, choreography, the body, how that takes a role or plays a part in how you teach and how you actually engage with your students. And are there any key takeaways in your teaching career so far that have impacted your practice and vice versa?
I think more generally, just sort of, I think getting to a point of understanding that it's a space of shared learning. I think sort of teaching and particularly being able to teach at art schools with other artists and being kind of in dialogue really with kind of like sort of for want of a better word, these emerging artists and that exchange of ideas and stuff. And I think it's made me think about like the sort of power and agency of facilitation, because I think my role isn't really to kind of like sort of like judge the value of people's art. It's really just to help facilitate their processes or provide a kind of a sort of critical framework that allows them to kind of articulate maybe what it is they're sort of doing. So and that in and of itself, these kind of like sort of pedagogical imperatives are really like creative processes in themselves. So I think it's made me realize over time that this is like a really vital, important kind of creative space. And I think that's also why, and it's also part of my practice, I think, I'm sort of like this sense, I know it's not the case for everyone that teaches, which is absolutely fine. But for me, it's a really important, critical learning space of exchange and sort of dialogue. And often there's more license to kind of test things out and be more experimental. Like I think if I had a very particular, I mean, I don't, but if I had a very particular kind of like gallery-based practice, I think I'd sort of be in trouble, because I think often in, being in these kind of learning contexts is often where I'm sort of trying things out and can be definitely more kind of sort of playful. Yeah, so I think, I mean, and yeah, and particularly things like sort of, you know, like workshops, for example, as a kind of, as a platform for kind of doing things. I've been really interested in like these, you know, you have sort of kind of formats like lectures and seminars and workshops, which are sort of frames for kind of engaging, but in and of themselves have sort of huge amounts of kind of creative potential. And yeah, I mean, just challenged kind of all the time, just being really challenged all the time is really, really great. And being forced to look at new things, you know, like I was having a tutorial last night and thinking about like makeup, you know, and thinking about, you know, approaches to that, and how that might intersect with a painting practice. And it's like, I mean, so yeah, it's really important, I think, for me.
Because I wanted to talk about your hospital rooms project. And I think that fits in quite nicely, where you're the artist that goes in, but then you actually have to work with patients and members of staff to create an artwork that is going to be in the waiting rooms of a hospital.
Yeah.
It's very much like a give and take. So could you maybe tell us a bit about how you, because obviously you're teaching the people there about the artwork and how to make a piece, but also you're having to take something and use their knowledge as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, I mean, sorry, I'm just sharing an image so just people know what I'm talking about, really. But yeah, I mean, Hospital Rooms is a really fantastic organisation. Tim and Neve, who founded and run it, are really, really amazing. And you know, the premise of Hospital Rooms is to artists are invited to kind of work with service users on psychiatric wards. And I've done 2 projects, and I mean, it's amazing the kind of sort of level of sort of access, and the dynamic of having to kind of respond and work in that environment. But you know, the staff and service users are incredibly like open and enthusiastic. But yeah, I've done these 2 projects. So the dining room one was in Croydon, most recently in 2019, which was a male ward that I worked on. And you know, the starting point for that was just like doing these wax rubbings. And often what I really like about the challenge of this is trying to think about, there's obviously lots of constraints in terms of imagery or materials that you can kind of work with. So you just have to kind of really strip back and maybe like forget a lot of the kind of methodologies that I would kind of normally rely on. But yeah, so I was just thinking about kind of wax rubbings and thinking about, we did this workshop with the service users where we did wax rubbings around the ward. There was like a small yard in different rooms. And it just reminded me, I remembered that, I mean, it's a bit tangential, but Ruskin, John Ruskin, used to take rubbings on his like tours, ground tours of Europe. And just thinking about it as a kind of early form of kind of mapping and recording and kind of capturing. And it was really great how, you know, through these rubbings that we did, we were sort of really talking about the kind of space and the environment and the way that you were observing things in different ways. And so out of that came these rubbings that sort of I ended up making into this kind of composition that we then blew up and transposed into the dining room of that ward. And yeah, the previous project, which is at the Maudsley, sorry, in South London, was on a women's ward. And again, that came out of us doing a workshop, which is sort of just based on like that effect of kind of like petrol on a rainy day on pavements, where you get oil on water, and then there's kind of like amazing kind of rainbow kind of effects. And yeah, I was just really interested in that idea of the kind of sort of beautiness in the kind of like urban environment. So again, we did like a workshop where, and they had a small yard where on a non-rainy day, we were like sort of squirting water and and then putting droplets of oil and then seeing what effects were being made. So it was kind of like all these images, the prints above the sofa that you can see, were all kind of made by myself and service users. And there were these really great conversations about which ones worked and which ones didn't and why they didn't work. So, but yeah, and I think for me, again, that thing of sort of really testing your practice or engaging in dialogue and conversation in these very specific contexts are really, really enriching, rewarding, but they're also challenging. I mean, that sense in which I think your authority and security as an artist is sort of challenged. You have to sort of try and make sense of, you know, the activity. It has to kind of really work with the people that you're collaborating with or the people that are participating. It's got to be of value, and often they'll tell you if it's not, which is great, you know. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes you hear of projects like this where it feels almost exploitative, that the artist goes in and kind of uses, you know, people that are not within an arts institution or might not necessarily have their own practice. But this, it seems like it was a really two-way sort of relationship with service users and people within the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's interesting, the sort of dynamic as well, because I think, for example, it can't be too personal. Like, you can't facilitate it for the individuals that are there because, you know, hopefully they're not going to be in there for that long, you know, and the work is only seen by mostly service users, their families who are visiting, or the staff. So the audience is not a public audience, and people aren't going to be wandering off and coming to see it. So although you're working with a specific group of people, you know, we're having to think about the fact that they're going to be new people that are coming to this as well. So, I mean, that was also the dynamic is very specific, but I do like the kind of negotiation and the kind of transparency, really, of the sort of how the dialogue is sort of set up, and then, you know, the staff who are often the constant in the space are really, really involved and enthusiastic about these spaces being transformed.
That's great. Thank you. Similarly, in talking about learning, teaching, exchanging, collaboration, you mentioned Wising earlier, and you're also a trustee at Wising. Is that correct? Yes. You are indeed. And with Wising, they have the residency, among many residencies and many opportunities. More recently, Amplify is something that you're a part of as well. Can you talk a little bit about Amplify and your role in that, and yeah, any extensions from current practices and ideas that you want to explore as it pertains to the digital?
Yeah, well, I mean, Amplify is an initiative that Wising have launched for young people, for young artists, effectively a kind of mentoring program, support program. In the previous iteration, I did a workshop. I mean, I have to say that I'm very peripheral to, like, it's totally something that Lucy Ship and the Wising team kind of sort of developed. And yeah, so in previous years, I've led kind of workshops, which has involved doing some like performance activities, performance workshops, and some mentoring. So being in dialogue with some of the artists about their work and thinking through, yeah, some practical professional implications of them just negotiating being artists in the world. And obviously, we're in a sort of new iteration. Actually, there's just been a recent call out. I think the deadline's actually passed, but I'm going to be doing in a similar role, but obviously online, distanced. But again, I think it's sort of part of a kind of commitment to kind of sort of mentoring. I mean, I was part of a different program that actually Eastside Projects and Wising do together, which is Syllabus, which I mean is just a really amazing program. Like the year I did it was with Jessie Darling. We were both mentors. Just again, really amazing like artists. And well, it's particularly with that program, I was like, these artists are like amazing. It's like I want them to be mentoring me. But it was really nice to have that opportunity and privilege to be in dialogue with like peers. And also, you know, the wider network of amazing institutions, you know, yeah, Spike Island, Studio Voltaire, etc. All S1, Sheffield, are all part of syllabus's programs. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's part of a wider thing of like just support networks and peer group networks for artists and the importance of that. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the lockdown has been very special in its kind of dynamics, but I think just that thing of the career trajectory of artists, you know, particularly coming out of art school, or those who've never been to art school, or maybe did a BA and didn't do an MA, or did an MA and then don't know what to happen, you know, how do you sustain a career? How do you, you know, I think certainly the only way that I've got as far as I have done is through kind of, I mean, through networks. I mean, that's a bit more formalized way of saying it, but it's just through ongoing conversations and dialogues. And those things are really, really essential, you know, and obviously I think art schools have had to kind of monetize the facilitation of those networks, but I think it's really important. And there's intergenerational dialogues, like how I really sort of benefited from like those intergenerational conversations with, you know, people like Keith Piper or Sutapa Biswas or Sonia Boyce, you know, just, yeah, that's also something I think is, I feel sort of a sense of very keenly. Oh.
You're muted, Candice.
This happens to me all the time. It's really
Me
annoying.
too.
But apologies. Yeah, lots of things to touch upon there. Thank you for sharing. Just wanted to reiterate, if you're interested in learning more about syllabus, you can go to the Eastside Projects website. We've just announced all the current participants for this year and the facilitators, including Jade Montserrat, which is brilliant. So if you want to know more about syllabus, you can visit the website, number one. Number two, I think we only have around 15 minutes left. So would want to quickly, very, very quickly touch upon plans for the show that you're co-curating at Eastside Projects next year, just to kind of give a little taste. And then I will also ask if you have any questions to use the chat function that's in the Zoom. So we can spend the last 10 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes or so, with some questions that Harold can respond to. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And Harold, if you want to quickly talk about, tease the viewers, tease the listeners with some ideas and thoughts that you've got for our show next year with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the show's kind of emerging out of a sort of dialogue with Eastside Projects, Gavin Ruth, and both of yourselves as well. And I guess the initial impetus was really thinking about kind of performance and the kind of presentation and exhibition of performance, live performance. I mean, I have to say, like, this whole process is just like a luxury to have, like, a kind of back and forth. But I guess one of the impetuses has been really thinking about, and it's obviously shifted, because I think we did start before the lockdown and everything initially, I think, if my mind serves me correctly. I mean, there's been a shift in really thinking about the staging. How do you stage live performance? And again, for me, something that's always intrinsic in particularly live performance is the relationship and the encounter between the audience and the performer or the work, however it's kind of constituted. So a lot of the conversations we've had have been thinking about the dynamics of that. And linking into that, trying to think about kind of narrative strands, and there are some artists that we were really interested in and certain practices we're really drawn to. And something I've sort of tried to kind of identify and frame, and I've used as a kind of bit of a filter, is the idea of the loop as a kind of sort of construct. And in some ways I'm seeing that in relation to cycles and reiterations, reactivations. Often I think I'm really interested in how artists are kind of negotiating particularly kind of histories and material, and thinking more broadly kind of within the kind of culture of circuits and loops, and how loops materialize in different cultural spheres, you know, whether that's kind of sort of music, ideas of kind of sort of sampling, and again, I'm sort of interested in kind of like, for example, interested in the kind of long history of kind of hip hop and the sort of like inherent practices that kind of come out of hip hop as a sort of kind of culture. But yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things we're definitely thinking about is in staging how audiences will encounter liveness when at the moment the idea of bodies in spaces is very transgressive or is problematized by, you know, the very real concerns of kind of like safety, people's personal health and safety. But also thinking about the kind of emerging practices that are coming about in terms of, you know, the way that I think artists and institutions are adapting to presenting work, mediated work, whether it's on platforms like this, or whether it's thinking about how the audience is choreographed or constructed or selected, if numbers are kind of limited. So there's all these things that I think are really, that sort of partly we're sort of touching on and negotiating, that hopefully the work is going to be a sort of platform for, and thinking about multiple points of kind of like engagement, whether that's online or in person, thinking about how to negotiate presenting the work in the space. And we're also really excited to be collaborating with the International Dance Festival as well, so really thinking through yeah, again, that I think that's going to be a really exciting, being in the kind of context of this wider festival that's going to be happening across Birmingham. Yeah, sorry, I don't know, I can keep going.
You don't have to. You can stop. Remember, it's just meant to be a tease. You're just meant to tantalize their taste buds. Well, thank you so much. There you go. Thank you for that. We do actually have 3 questions. I'm just looking in the chat now.
I have one as well that was sent through email. So that was the first question we got. So I'm happy to do that one first. Question from Carla. Your work makes me think about the Pansula dancers in South Africa, who were these dancing troupes influenced by American jazz in their townships. During apartheid, they used their bodies, outfits, and movement as a counterculture through these incredibly powerful dance moves and bringing together of community. How do you feel about this as a reference? Also, with current limitations and restrictions, how do you find new ways to continue to dance or make work?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know that reference. Thank you so much for sharing it. Is it in the chat? Because I need to follow that up.
I can put it in the chat. I'll put the question in the chat.
Write that down. Yeah. I definitely want to check that. And thank you so much. It's a really generous and helpful reference. I mean, yeah, I wasn't aware of that particular practice from South Africa, but it's something I'll definitely sort of check out. I think the second part of the question was, I think, how do I remind me? How do I,
with current limitations and restrictions, how do you find new ways to continue to dance or to make work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's funny because I'm doing a very specific project actually about the kind of history of social dance and duration in relation to particularly sort of traumas and ironically sort of pandemics and plagues and things like that. So it's this project for the Wellcome Trust, Wellcome Collection. Sorry. So I've been thinking a lot about like what this book on social choreography. Oops, this camera. which is really interesting in terms of thinking about the ideology of performance, dance, movement. It's by Andrew Hewitt, if anyone's looking for social choreography. But I've been thinking specifically about dance, social dance, so like, you know, just groups of people dancing in relation to the joy that comes out of that collectivity, but also the kind of physical actualization of, you know, your body moving without the pressure of it being good. Like so much about that I really hate about dance is about like value systems, about I'm a good dancer, I'm not a good dancer, and it's like, it doesn't matter. It's just about that sense of being in the body and the pleasure of your body and its potential to move in any way that you want it to is something that I'm really interested in. And yeah, I mean, I've been doing it by, I mean, I don't know, I sort of grew up in a house where people just danced. I mean, mum was just listening to music all the time. There was kind of sort of, you know, like high life music playing in the background, blasting out. And that sense of kind of a movement vocabulary is just something that's very much part of the everyday. And I also dance a lot on my own. Like, I remember that's weird, but so I think I've just sort of recognized through this project partly the value of that. And I know there's been some really interesting things about collectives and groups of people like dancing on Zoom and obviously DJ sort of parties that are being facilitated by platforms like Zoom and you know, all the other ones. So those things are, I mean, in terms of work, I've been really interested in them just in this research for this new project, but I guess the rest are just parts of the everyday.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions that have come in last minute, so, and we've only got around 8 minutes left. So I would say, Harold, if it's okay with you, maybe to pick two questions if you can. I know I just want to try and make it as democratic as possible, but maybe just pick two that you think are quite interesting, or maybe you can touch upon quite quickly, if that's all right. And thank you for sending your questions, everyone, though.
Sorry.
I love that universal pose of being like,
The glasses on. Okay, so Sydney, I'm going to ask Sydney's question. So she says, Harold, do you adapt your work to the reactions of the audience? Are you able to play on some characteristics of your performance more when you perform that piece for the second or third time? That's a really good question. So yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you could talk about the covers works in terms of the audience. It's interesting, the sort of process of being in those poses and the proximity to the audience. I guess I am always aware of the audience and aware of being visible to the audience. But I think part of the endurance of trying to hold those poses is also like a forgetting of the audience. And often what ends up happening, for anyone that's seen this works, is that there's a kind of shaking and like my body, like all my wobbly bits start wobbling, and you know, it's the image sort of breaks down. And so I kind of sort of go in and out of being aware of being the subject of the gaze, and just being lost in sort of holding that pose. I mean, there are different works that I do that are more directly engaged with audiences through activities like making or dialogue. I think that obviously are constituted by a sort of collaboration. Okay, sorry, I was trying to answer that question very quickly. Do you want me to answer another one? We've got time for another?
Yeah, just one more would be great. Thank you.
So Jade Foster, do you think liveness is a set of energy exchanges? Ooh. And how will the let's just move, sorry. How will the live performance happenings engage or interact with documented performance? Okay, I've got to think through that. These are like dissertation questions. Do you think liveness is a set of energy exchange? Yes, I do. I think that you know, just bodies in space, I think, is definitely energy exchange and certainly that sense in which you're aware of presence as well, I think is such a, is like the materiality of liveness, you know, inhabiting the space. So definitely. And how will live performance happenings engage or interact with documented performance?
That's what we've been discussing for your show, isn't it? Like how do we put those two things together? And
absolutely. I don't have a definitive answer, but I mean, I guess I'm interested in the differing sort of qualities. And again, I mean, you slightly have to unpack documented performance, like I would say mediated performance as well. Because I think, you know, liveness, like this is live, but obviously it's mediated by these cameras and this platform. And that's a different kind of liveness to, you know, being in us all being in the same space and sharing the same environment. Whereas I think documented performance, there's a sense of kind of time passing and history. That's a sort of different layer in terms of like mediation and editing. So, but it's a really good question. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I don't know.
I think, yeah, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'll probably start to wrap it up here. What I will do is I will save all the questions that everyone has asked. So if at some point you want to touch upon that post this chat, that's something that you can do. But I will save them because I think they are very, very interesting. And I think that will be definitely helpful for us as we work through the show for next year in partnership with Dance Exchange. So yeah, very much appreciative for all the questions that have come through. I want to say thank you everyone for joining us today. Just a few quick admin-y notes that they always tend to flush out at the end. We do have a few activations and events and projects coming up at Eastside. So on the 24th of October, we have Yellow Fields, and partaking in that are a few EOP members here at Eastside. And that will be taking place online. All this information will be available on, or is available on the Eastside Projects website. So definitely go check that out. We also have a Exploring Worlds talk in November. I'm not sure when the next studio visit will be, but everything will be updated on our website and of course our social media platforms as well. But yeah, I just want to say thank you, Harold, as well, for joining us and taking the time out to speak with us. It's been an absolute pleasure and many things to think about and peruse going forward as well.
No, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, huge thanks to the whole Eastside team. Candice, yes, thank you so much.
And this is being recorded, so we will put it up online as well if you want to revisit it at any point or share. A lot of love in the comments. So yeah, very nice.
Lovely. Well, I think we'll